Several people have asked about your dad.
He's still dead. Thanks for asking.
Oh, well. They want to know what was his background, profession, opinions, and personality. He sounds like a devout Catholic man and a good father. What kind of man was he?
All that's true. What kind of man was my father? Well, my dad was quite simply the greatest man I ever met, and I've met more than a few. He was born in 1926 in New Bedford, Massachusetts, in part of what, for want of a better word, you'd have to call a French ghetto. But his parents were not lower class people, shall we say. His dad was an actor and a writer, and they had two homes in New York and in New Bedford. And when the season would open up in New York, they would the theatrical season and all that. They would take the Fall River line, first class. You always remember linen and sterling silver. Nobody travels like that anymore. To New York, but he was very, very proud of being French. French was his first language. He had his education was at parochial schools in New Bedford. Half the day in English, half the day in French. So he was perfectly bilingual. He, as I say, was very proud of being French. He was very devout. He was named, his name was funny, his name was Guy Coulombe. And Guy is not a family name. We have a lot of family names in my family. Charles and Joseph, Andre, Alexis. You see the same names over and over and over again. But Guy was very strange, was very peculiar. And he was named after an individual who was very popular in those days in Catholic circles, but is almost unheard of today. A little kid called Guy de Fongalon, who died, I think, when he was 8 years old, and was the youngest non-martyr ever to be proposed for canonization. His cause was pretty much shut down in 1948. I don't know why, but it was.
Okay.
But nevertheless, he was very popular at the time my father was born. And my grandparents, being very devout, loved Guy de Fongalon and hoped that their son would follow in his footsteps. His older sister, they named Fleurette, which means little flower. And that reflects the devotion they also had to Saint Therese, which my father had. His favorite saints were Our Lady and Saint Therese and Saint Joseph. He was very much of a thinker, though. He came around in the immediate aftermath of the Sentinelle controversy, in which the good chunk of the French-Canadian population of New England were pitted against their Irish bishop. And it almost came to a schism, though not quite. And it was papered over. But the memory, my dad very much had in mind. And so decades later, the clergy seemed to go crazy. We just sort of laughed and said, yeah, well, they've been there before. So it didn't shake his faith, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
As it did for so many people, you know, father's pouring cereal on his head, the faith must be alive.
Right.
Well, no. My dad always had he lacked that worship of the clergy that led so many people astray, both in Quebec and down here. He always wanted to be an actor. And he went into World War II. His mother did not want him to go. His family were very much America first. He was born in 26, as I was saying. So when he turned 17, he asked her to let him volunteer, and she refused because she didn't want him fighting Mr. Roosevelt's war. But when he turned 18, and of course he was her only son, so he didn't have to go. But he volunteered on his 18th birthday. And they sent him off to the Pacific, and he was a tail gunner against the Japanese. 13 successful missions.
Wow.
when the average lifespan of a tail gunner in combat was seconds.
Wow.
So he always used to say that other people may say they believe in God. I know. So anyway, he came back from the war, and he went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts on the GI plan. He came out here briefly in 1948 and decided he didn't like the movies and went back. And he went into radio, which had always been his great love. He was on a number of shows, and it was on a radio stage, the 1951, the Lux Theater of the Air, that he met my mother. And she was the first woman to break into radio in 15 years because she could do 5 voices in one broadcast.
Wow.
Yeah, that meant they only had to pay one lady for 5 roles. Trust me, they weren't wowing. They weren't like, wow, she's so talented. They were, wow, so much money we saved. that was their wow. But at any rate, so he realized for various reasons in the mid-60s that acting wasn't going to cut it in terms of New York, so he came out to LA and lost his money, sadly, but never let it get him down. And that was the thing about my father. You know, the worst, the kinds of misfortunes that would destroy other men, he laughed at. And that was the thing about Dad. He could always find the humor in any situation, no matter how awful it seemed. And his great line was, in 10 years, we'll be laughing at all of this. You couldn't impress him. You couldn't intimidate him. You couldn't shift him. But he was always a gentleman. Never threw his weight around. He used to say that the ideal is the mailed fist and the velvet glove. And that if you're truly powerful, you don't have to show it. You don't have to impress anyone. But he also used to say, you know, never justify yourself. Let the other man justify himself. Who is he asking you these questions anyway? Let him go. Yeah, that was the way he was. Very well read. I can honestly say that every single one of my intellectual interests, my father started me on.
Wow.
Sure, he had a very wide-ranging mind. His military connection he kept up in the New York State Guard and then out here in the California State Military Reserve.
Is he why you're a monarchist?
No. Well, yes, no, yes.
Oh, okay.
No in the sense that he was not a monarchist per se. He was very proud of this country and its institutions. Yes, in that his affections for the House of Stuart and the House of Bourbon, certainly, plus my mother's for the House of Habsburg, really destroyed any kind of prejudice against monarchy that I might have.
I see.
And while he was pro-American, it didn't make him anti-English. You know, he would point out, for instance, the Declaration of Independence, the Quebec Act, which is what gave our people their freedom of religion and language and so on, is denounced in the most Orwellian terms. But that knowledge didn't turn him off on the country. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was the thing about my father. His knowing something did not turn him on or off about much of anything. If you understand what I'm saying. In other words, how to put this another way. He knew, the way the vast majority of people don't, that the revolution was not all about freedom and liberty. Mm. But it did not reduce his love of his country one little bit. You see what I mean?
No, I absolutely see what you mean.
He could hold these things in stasis because, forget the revolution. This is the country his grandfather came to that has done very, very well by us. And so we have an obligation to it. It's not some weird pie in the sky, Spirit of 76 drill. Mm-hmm. This is the country that also, from all time, God saw fit to put us in. And that we have an obligation to evangelize and to improve for its sake.
Yeah.
The faith doesn't need America. America needs the faith. And if we truly love America, as we pretend we do, remember the big mouth and the little brainstem, rather than simply saying it's wonderful, we'll do our best to make it so. So I can tell you he was a real patriot.
Yeah.
He did not think its institutions were the best ever devised, or that it's the last best hope of mankind, or the shining city on the hill. Well, it's the country that our fathers came to, and the country that our ancestors built, even before it was a country, and that has done really well by us. So his patriotism was based in reality.
Mm-hmm.
He loved history. He loved not just American history, which he adored. You know, he was a avid subscriber to American Heritage magazine.
Yeah.
Whose reappearance I am very happy for. But there were so many things he was interested in.
Yeah.
The thing with my dad was not what is he interested in, it's what is he not interested in.
Mm.
He was really a universal man that way. And that he had an unending sense of curiosity and an unending sense of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing about my dad. In with all these other qualities, he was a lot of fun. He was a great joker. He had been around, and he was still an idealist. You know, there's the old joke, what's a cynic? Was a romantic who's been mugged. Well, my dad had equivalently been mugged many, many a time, but it did not embitter him or make him a cynic at all. Quite the contrary.
Yeah.
So, what kind of a man was my father? I go back to what I started with, the greatest man I ever knew. And if I could be a tenth the man he was before I die, then I'll have done something.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question as to what kind of a man Dad was. It is something of a consolation to know that I'll be planted right by him when I croak in Notre Dame Cemetery, Fall River, Massachusetts. So if you ever get the chance, ladies and gentlemen, you're in Fall River, drop by. Don't tell him I sent you, he'll already know.
Wow.
But honestly, ladies and gentlemen, also I do have to say about Dad that he had a great sympathy for the underdog. You know, even if he didn't think the underdog was right, he had a tremendous sympathy for it.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if he saw somebody getting beaten up, even if he knew it was the guy's own stupid fault, it didn't stop him from wading in. And he had that great facility, which I wish more Catholics today had, of suspended judgment. In other words, he didn't simply jump to conclusions and say it's this or it's that. He'd look at it and say, well, okay,
Yeah.
these are the facts so far as I know them, but he could let it sit there. He used to say that the vast majority of people in opinion polls lie.
Mm-hmm.
The truth of the matter is that they don't know or don't care. If these polls were absolutely honest, would be the majority in every case. And he was the one who told me, you know, don't feel you have to have an opinion on everything.
Yeah.
If you don't care about something, you don't care about it.
Yeah.
And that takes, especially in our society, it's become so politicized and so, what's the word I want? So divided.
Yeah.
So polarized. That's the word. It does take a certain amount of courage to say,
Mm-hmm.
you know what, I don't know. I don't have an opinion. I don't care, even. It does take a certain amount of courage to say that. And it takes, and this again, he taught me, it takes a certain amount of courage to say, well, no, it's not all that way.
Mm-hmm.
You see, in a society polarized such as ours, you're supposed to line up on this or on that. These guys are all right, these guys are all wrong, and that's the end of it. It's impossible for us to see that, well, you know, our side has a certain amount of wrong on it, and their side has a certain amount of right.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean the certain amount of right they've got doesn't necessarily mean that they're completely in the right.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to bear it in mind. See? And I will say, and I'll end off my talking about Dad, though it's a subject I could go on and on about,
Right.
frankly. Well, I mean...
No, I mean, rightfully so. Rightfully so. I wish I would have met your dad. It would have been... I would have loved to have met him.
Well, your brother did.
Yeah.
So, there you go. See, that's what comes to being older.
Yeah.
But, did we need to say that, really? Anyway, Dad had that facility of being able to value things that were not necessarily of value to him. And I remember reading, was he reading? Colonel Churchward's books on the lost continent of Mu. And I asked him, I said, "Do you really believe all that, Dad?"
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, gosh, no, but isn't it fascinating?" That was my father all over.
Yeah.
No, not at all, but isn't it fascinating?
Yeah.
So anyway, there you go. There's my dad.
Okay. That's it for this episode. If you enjoyed listening to Charles, please subscribe to the Tumblr House YouTube channel. If you'd like to send Charles a question, you can do so through YouTube comments or contact us through the Tumblr House website. See you next time.
And if you're not good, your dad will get you.